Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast.
Hello. Happy Tuesday.
Ooh.
Sure that's the right one?
Is that the right one? Are we a little not confident here?
Happy Thursday. Not at all confident at all.
Okay, that didn't sound like the normal enthusiasm that we had. That was, I think,
Not confident.
Tuesday.
That was basically us
was a stall for
me looking over to see if I was going to get your reaction of like, am I going to miss it? And going, yep, I'm going to miss it, and just saying it. Wow.
You're doing the math in your head. Okay,
Apparently
today's
I
what?
didn't miss it.
What episode is this one going to be?
Can we start with that kind of Tuesday? I don't know if we can have the same conversation with that least enthusiasm. Happy Tuesday.
Oh, I could manage.
Okay.
Okay. This is going to be a fun episode. I can see that already.
Oh man, I'm going to argue with everything Seth says. We're going to get it.
All right.
I'm just going to say, Tommy, that's probably not a button you want to push this morning.
Oh, today?
Just going to say that.
You know what?
But you can. I mean, having said that, maybe it will be fun.
Listen, I don't call danger. Danger calls me. Okay. So
yeah, well, she's not very nice to you, Tommy.
I know. I like taking my stripes.
I don't know if your wife knows about danger. That's
that's the nickname.
All right.
Never
Moving on.
We're gonna move on.
New topic.
She doesn't listen, right?
No one does. Actually, they only that's the funny thing. Most of our family members only listen to the first couple minutes. Had we said this like 15 minutes in the episode, I'm pretty sure no one would have heard it. But the beginning of the episode, yes, they may have.
I should do my then introductory, since when I'm pretty busy, I don't do a great job of calling my family. So hi, Mom. Hi, Elena. Hello.
That's cheating, dude. That's totally cheating.
This counts. I'll call you next week.
No. I'll call you every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:30 a.m.
Join in.
Good to see you online. Tommy, that's very manipulative. You don't call your family, and you use them to get more views. It's kind of smart.
I don't tell them I mean, listen, it helps if it helps us.
If it helps, it helps.
Here.
We'll go up to 4 users total.
They don't bring users to the podcast, so
not yet.
Not yet.
All right, jumping in today. I don't really have any major announcements. There's not a whole bunch of things coming out from the Microsoft news or blog or announcements. It seems like a little bit quiet right now. So I think we're going to skip right into our main topic for today. So the main topic today is an article Tommy has found. I think this will just create some interesting discussion. The name of the article is The Evolution and Future of Interactive Data Visualization. And it's coming in a 2-part series, so we'll have to kind of read through part 1 and part 2. It's Nightingale Devs. The author is Clever Frankie, I think is how you would say his name. I'll go with it.
Frankie.
That's what's listed on the.
I would agree with you.
Okay, I was just confirming. Looking for some verbal cues here from Tommy as we look at the video here, making sure that yes, this is in fact Clever Frankie.
I wasn't expecting Clever Frankie, but yeah, that's
okay. Shocker. There we go. But jump us in, Tommy. Give us a kind of an intro of like the article. What's it trying to convey here? It's just kind of talking about this is a little bit more historical of where visual data has come from and how we see this portrayed on computers.
Yeah, I mean, even though we say we're old, we're veterans in the space for data viz, Power BI, which 9 years is nothing to sneeze at. Or data viz has been around for a long time, and even the collection of data and then trying to communicate with it. The article goes, and I think, and the part 1 at least is really focusing on how technology and people and the ability, not just on the RAM and the computer speed to show visualizations, but more importantly, the ability to share and consume that information has changed the way we, 1, interact with data, and 2, visualize it. So we're starting right kind of from the beginning in terms of weather data was our first thing we collected, but talks about all the different ways. And moving forward, I think more importantly, when we look at where we are at today in 2024 with the amazing technology we have and the amazing ability to collect data, what's causing that as more people adapt and I think probably evolve to being better adept to looking at data? And then where do we go from here? And also then
So I have 2 questions. One is you said part 1. So this is part 1 of how many articles?
2.
2. All right. I thought you were going to drop like, this is 7.
17
This
articles.
is now going to be
I like
thing
to
we talk
plan
about.
our 7-part series a little
And-
better. So
And the second part is, how far back in the Wayback Machine are we going?
yeah, we're not going to necessarily, I think, focus our time, but we got to start here 1657. So
Can't wait to hear this.
yeah, again, I'm not going to necessarily choose to focus my time. Really, we can talk about interactive data in the pre-web era. That's part 1. That's pre-1994. And I love some of these maps on data visualization, looking at weather statistical data in the Boston area. And again, in the article, contour, conformant, trend surface, the giant pixels on a screen. I do remember this from at least high school, of data viz, and the ability to actually consume data was a very, I don't want to say glitchy, but it was a stagnant approach. It wasn't necessarily something interactive to what we're used to today.
So I like where we're going on this one, but I'm going to just kind of pick on some of the article pieces here. I want to kind of just pick apart some sections here, right? So the article kind of starts at like 1657, right? It's data collected from that period of time. They're visualizing data for, global temperatures and kind of showing a graph of this stuff. So I think there are a number of key sections that are kind of pointed out here, right? So there is data that comes out pre of the internet and the web. And then there's data that comes out after the internet has been invented. So I feel like this is a kind of a relevant point, because how did you distribute information before the internet? It was all in print. It's all in paper form. So unless you had advanced ways of printing things, visuals, and I don't even know what's in newspapers back that old. I don't know. I don't know how you would visualize that stuff, but that would be the only medium. Someone would draw up an image, put it in a newspaper, and that was the image that we used to graphically show the information. Now moving kind of forward from that, post-internet invention, I think that's where a lot of this stuff starts accelerating faster. And I'm going to say this again because I said it a lot on the podcast. It feels like a lot of data has been commoditized. It's becoming a commodity. So it starts with, okay, you have to have a computer. You have to have the right kind of software. And so in the article, it kind of talks about all right, we now get computers that can do some very basic maths on things and start drawing things on a screen for you. And then it gets to a point of, okay, now we're having computers that are actually personal computers. And so now for $1,000, you can have this laptop thing or this big brick of a machine on your desk and do things at home. That's a new era. And then it gets adopted by business. Business starts utilizing it. And people now start finding the value locally, inside their homes. Yeah. And then it goes from there to okay, well, the computers exist. What about the software? The software doesn't exist yet. And this is where I think I'd like to pick up the article, honestly. I want to skip all that old stuff.
Okay.
Some of these, come on, man. Some of these images are pretty crazy.
They're
touch screens in 1972.
Or what was a touch screen?
I mean, the brick of a house behind the screen. That's what we want to talk about, but
true.
Well, there's an important divide, and I want to focus on the digital space too. But just real quick on that pre-era, and then we'll go into the future or into the past, I guess. But there's a lot of important aspects that we've learned from the pre-digital era or the pre-internet era that we've done on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And about one of the big things back in the day was also the lack of resources, not just data, but also ink.
Mm-hmm.
I think Enrico Benetti did one of his articles, and he talked about the data to ink ratio, something that now is totally applied in my training, but also in my idea of as we build. And that idea was you only have so much ink on a newspaper, or you only have so much ink to use on paper. Use it wisely. If you have two X and Y axis with titles and you already have a title, well, you're wasting a lot of ink that the company's using to spend. And there's a lot of principles here, even back in the day, that are still pretty heavily applied now, or should be applied now, even though we have all the resources and all the software and all the internet possible.
I think you're talking about the theory or the data to ink ratio as described by Edward Tufte.
Yes,
right?
that's right. Edward Tufte. So
Edward Tufte was kind of the idea of that, the originator of that. And I liked how he simplified a complex problem and said, imagine the cost to make ink
Mhm.
was extremely expensive. And this is what I mean by like talking about visualizations and things have been commoditized, because
Yes.
today, like you can have color all over the place. You can have like, it doesn't cost you anymore time wise to render a report that has a lot of stuff or not a lot of stuff, other than the fact that it's a lot of time to build it. Right. So now I think our time is measured not in ink data to ink ratio, but more of like developer time to value ratio. Right.
Yeah.
Do I want to do all that extra styling to make it super fancy? But I like this concept, but I'll just make my point here and move on.
Mhm.
I like how you took it to the extreme. Like, okay, imagine ink is no longer 10 cents a black and white copy. Let's turn it all the way up to $1,000. Like, let's make it really expensive for us to put ink onto paper. Okay, knowing that information, do you make different decisions? And I think you do.
Yeah. It's funny. It's like the lack of limited resources kind of almost output best practices that we use today.
Ooh, that's pretty impactful. I like that. Limited resources outputs. Like you have to really think about what you want to produce.
Right.
I like
Now, there's
that.
probably a better way to say this, and I may make a t-shirt out of this, but I like where that's going. But I mean, you look at all these visuals here and the start of digital information. Again,
Mhm.
the number one probably concern, if you were to ask the people working on this, is like, what's your biggest problem? What's your barrier to entry to get this started? They're going to say probably our ability to compute. So we have to be very conscious and very calculated on what we're going to render. And then it's probably that ability on what data we actually have access to. So there's a lot of calculation that, again, we don't even have to think about now.
Mhm. I
Well,
do
just
agree.
because you're not thinking about it doesn't mean that there's not a cost, right?
That's
Like,
a really
and
good
that's where things can accelerate. And I do like your point about the cost of things driving more intentional action, and to some degree, as visualization has changed, or our ability to visualize things in tooling very quickly, so has I think been lost along the way here, because it's so commoditized, the value behind visualization, right? So it's kind of ironic from the standpoint that you would never see, or you couldn't see things, because in order to aggregate or put together a visual, you would need massive compute power, right? Which just didn't exist. Like, even you think, even when I started in databases, right? Like, if I think about some of the queries that I run against my big data, like, I wouldn't have been able to aggregate the data 15 years ago. And now we easily can not only aggregate, but I can just like, I can just throw it into a visual without much thought. Whereas pre those days, where it's like, hey, this is going to cost us $2,000 to come up with the analysis and everything, you're very diligent about all of the steps, because you get one shot at the processing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And in some degree, it's like, yeah, I'm talking data, but even in visualization, I wonder to some degree, Tommy, if there isn't as much focus or intent behind what we're throwing up on a page for people to digest. And that's where, to me, there's an interesting conversation point.
Well, I think that was my problem. And that kind of segues nicely into a question I was going to have. Is the other side of this coin is also all the visualizations you're seeing in the beginning here. This was not someone who was dragging and dropping with a mouse. There was a very specified skill, language, or tooling that was involved.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I said, I will be the guinea pig here. In 2015, you gave me Power BI and no skill in data visualization and no training in data visualization. And I apologize to all my first clients and all my first consumers of my reports, because it was very much kind of what you said, a throw up of the visuals, because you gave me access to all the data and then more or less all the tooling with no skill. So you're dealing with, back in the day, something with limited resources but very funneled skills, and we basically have flipped that on its head in today's world.
I do like that. And I think, again, I'll go back to like this whole concept of like becoming a commodity at this point. I really do think like things are becoming easier. It's becoming less effort. And I think I like your point there, Seth, because when you had to plan things out, when it was harder to do, you had to be much more measured about what you were producing.
Right.
I think this spurs two behaviors. One behavior it spurs is the ability to crank out a lot more reports quickly, which means I can try more things at once. But that means now I have potentially a lot more waste that I'm going to try. In the time it would take me to build
Right.
one thing, I could build 10. And how do I evaluate which of the 10 is the best solution? Or 2 of the 10 is the best solution. So I think that the behavior is I'm going to now produce a lot more. There's going to be a lot more stuff. And so the second behavior I think here is you tend to collect a lot more things. And so you're now becoming like this accumulator of a bunch of reports that may have certain amounts of value. And I see it in my tenant right now. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that's created that I haven't touched in a while. I throw it out there. It's like almost nothing. Okay, fine. It's in the tenant. I don't ever go back and clean it up. There's nothing like there's not going to auto scrub. There's not like get rid of it kind of stuff. It just kind of sits there.
So
what's more interesting to me, the more I think about this, is if previously in entire like people spent an inordinate amount of time to build a visualization, and we've come so far to like that requires a lot of expertise. And we all know, like we've read several books, and there's a lot of ideas and theories out there of like good visualization, good picking the best practices, doing all it is a role,
Studied role,
within UI, UX, etc.
Sure.
And we've like visualization has gotten so commoditized within these products that we're okay just saying self-service is a thing. Now, mind you, like it is for the standard things. Everybody knows what a bar chart is. Everybody knows what a line chart is. Everybody knows like what a pie chart is, unfortunately. But, like you throw in there, like everybody's just throwing stuff against the wall. And sometimes you're not choosing the right things, or you have to have conversations about look and feel. And like, there's a reason, there's intentionality behind this, but the meaning almost gets lost a little bit. And like the expectation that everybody can just vomit out the same stuff is a false one, right?
Yes.
Like if you still want good insights and good reporting and good visualization, it requires people that know and understand a lot of the technology structures and theories behind how you build these things effectively.
That goes to a great point that you said earlier about there's still a limited resource. You're just not aware of it anymore. Just because you have the entire canvas and you could put 20 visuals on there and it's not going to break, doesn't mean that you're running into problems because you're running into the cognitive load. I want to pose a scenario or if you were a data czar and you were working on a project and I gave you limited resources, very limited resources, what the computer could render and how many colors or visuals that you could do, would you have more confidence in the quality of that than if I just gave you kind of all the bells and whistles now?
Well, you're talking about like, version 2 of Power BI Desktop versus version whatever we're on now, like 9 years later.
5, right? Let's say version 0.5 kind of thing.
When it was Power BI Designer. So you're giving me Power BI Designer on one hand, you're giving me Power BI Desktop on the other hand.
Right. I'm giving you Power BI Service or something. Yeah.
With visual calc, so I can add visual.
Exactly. Because to me, that's where my head goes. Is I feel like if I was limited where there were barriers, I feel like I would output, at least initially, a better looking or more effective report based on where this conversation's going.
I don't know. I think it'd be more. I think better looking is a very subjective term to use here, because I think you could very much compare like, okay, there are great looking, let's call them sample dashboards on the internet. You go around and you look at like Novi Pro is one of the websites, has a lot of good examples of like incredible Power BI built reports that look nothing like a report. So I would call them amazing looking reports. I think you have to really define, to your question, what is the objective you're trying to accomplish? Are you trying to convey information to make a decision, or you're just trying to make a stunning, visually good looking report that interacts with great UI UX, right? I think my argument here is if you're just trying to convey information, you have to concisely think about what information you're trying to convey is, and design for that. Whether that's just a couple KPI cards, you can run your. I mean, I think I was watching a YouTube video saying, how could I have a better report run, or how could I run my what are my 5 metrics? So if I'm running a business and I was on a beach island somewhere, there's 5 numbers I should need to know if my business is healthy or not, or if I need to make changes or not. What are those 5 numbers? So if you keep distilling down less and less and less, I think you can get down to like, these are the critical things we care about to make our numbers better. And I think this actually speaks to the example that Microsoft gave when they talked about their KPI and their metrics. They have I think on their adoption roadmap, they have a little section on the right-hand side that talks a little bit more in depth about what Microsoft did with their internal KPIs, what they're doing with their internal metrics. And they had like 150 metrics or KPIs they're using to measure everything. They're like, that's too many. We can't make them all good. Is there something we can do to distill that down? I think they got it down to 45 or 35 key metrics that said, if we win on these, we can tie those metrics to success in selling, sales, and software and all these other things. So I think that's important to really cut out the noise and go down for simple and make action that way. But that speaks more to like, what's the point of the report?
Yeah.
Pretty or not, that's different.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that like limiting my resources is going to help me effectively do a better job. What I think it's pushing forward in my mind is like the expectation setting is different, right? Like back when we're looking at, hey, it's going to take a really long time or a ton of compute or ink to produce a visual. The value was the single visual because it gave insights that were otherwise really hard to see or completely unknown. And nowadays, like what is the value, and how do you quantify it compared to like, or different, like how do you quantify value versus different, like the fast path, throwing something on a page. And I think to me that kind of drives towards the levels of the type of reporting, right? You sometimes, or I should say, like the value here is there is self-service. The value is people can do analysis and they can look at aggregations. There's a ton of answers people can find by just utilizing the basics of Power BI, right? Like Power Query, I can create some buckets, I can filter out data and then throw it into a report page and create a visual and look at the visual and get insights I never would have just seen innately. Huge value in there. But the minute you get towards where that large effort of value was the single visual, I do think there's that delineation between, okay, now we have a senior leadership report or an executive leadership dashboard and report where you're really tying things out. And it is a comprehensive report where you're showing multiple different types of visualization or the best presentation for these types of metrics that allow people to consume them quickly. And that does require that you spend that extra time there. And maybe that's where my focus should be, as opposed to just carte blanche saying like, hey, like everything's vomit out there, but it's not. There's a ton more value that we can get because we have all these capabilities on the lower and lower levels, meaning people are making more informed decisions or making bigger mistakes because they can see more data and visualizing it wrong.
And Mike, this may actually be going to where you wanted to go to, and later in the article, where one of the still relatively new shifts in data visualization, we're so accustomed to it now because that's obviously what we're supposed to do, is the ability to share it. And the ability to have an audience. Like we're talking about the audience here. You're talking about the value that's based on the people viewing it. And we're talking about executive dashboards. This is still pretty relatively new, maybe 25 years old. The ability to easily share data visualization. That's one of the parts of the articles talks about. Everything was really still restricted to the physical world. It was printed or stored in a drive that we'd carry to another computer. We take this for granted now because Power BI is obviously the full intention of the whole tooling is the ability to consume that across an organization.
Yeah, you say that, but I haven't encountered organizations. No, I have encountered organizations that still save PBX files onto SharePoint drives and then have other people go access said reports from. So like
This
to
is
your
why I
point,
use the word intent.
but agreed. But like this is where I think what we're seeing now is like one part. I see this as like Lego bricks, right? One part of the technology had to be like the computers had to be strong enough and had enough memory to capture the data, right? Two, we needed to have software that's better to use. And the article talks about like using VisiCalc. I never used it. Using MATLAB. I did use that, but back in college for more engineering things. Lotus 123, like another, Excel like program. And so what you find here is there's like all these different programs. The software starts increasing in capability, which adds, again, it's to me, this is how I see it. It becomes more of a commodity, right? Everyone can get MATLAB. Everyone can get Lotus 123. And we're starting to continue to see the barrier drop for who can get access to these programs to start doing visual-based things. And then with the software comes like the proliferation of devices, right? Now it's a laptop is super cheap to go get. Everyone's got one. Now everything's on a mobile phone, right? So if your company doesn't have some sort of mobile option or mobile web version of your company software, like people aren't going to use it as easy. It's a lot more focused on like mobile experiences. And now I can buy these devices that are full computers that sit in my hand. That's incredible. We never had that before. And so I think what's happening again is the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, becoming more commoditized. With that, we're generating more and more data. Data is becoming a commodity. And now we're having the tooling that supports it all become more like a commodity. And another argument I'll use to kind of render against that is Power BI Desktop came out, and I think this was a genius move by Microsoft. It was free, where all the other heavier visualization tools, even Excel, if you call it a visualization tool, comes with a license. You have to pay for it. And I think the threshold here was Microsoft's going to make the tool free, but you pay for the share. That's the difference here. And I think to me that was a very wise move because it let everyone explore the tool, this brand new thing that they've never been experiencing before. They were able to get comfortable with that first, find that this could be really interesting and valuable, and then move into how do I share it with my team? How do I distribute it?
Can I ask you about the commodity? This is something I think we all agree on data is a commodity now, and something that's been touched on a lot in our previous conversations. In what way, as data as a commodity or technology as a commodity, have we as business intelligence MVPs or pros have to clean up after because data is a commodity? Obviously, I think we'd all consider it a net positive, right? We'd all say it's a good thing that data has more access to more people. But there are absolutely ways where it's hurt, right? There's ways that it's like we have to really put some band-aids on or really have to go back. Where will you see the biggest cause for data being a commodity that pros have to come in or have to be aware? It's not 100% commodity or positive.
I think someone scarred you along the
you don't have
path.
scars, man.
Well, I mean,
yeah, right.
I feel like we bring up this a lot with Tommy. He's like, how do we throw people at this problem for data quality? Like, I get it. I don't know if you can always have 100% clean quality all the time data, and yeah, it's going to be commodity. I mean, I think this comes with the territory, right? With more data, you get more junk. Like you're not going to be able to increase the volume of data without getting some level of additional junk thrown in there with everything else. So my answer to your question is, I think it's less about the data and the quality and the cleanliness of the data. I think it's more about who's responsible for making sure the data is of good quality for the organization to use. And I'm going to keep leaning on I really like this story of who's responsible? What's the data stewardship story that goes with the information? Because I think that's who cares how much data you have. You have a little bit, you can have a lot of it. But if it's wrong in a little form, or if it's wrong in a big form, someone needs to own: is this stuff valuable to our organization? How do we make sure it stays clean? How do we put controls around it so we know that when it gets out of shape, it's out of quality? When do we stop what we're doing to build new products to go focus back on the quality of the data or hire, to your point, Tommy, right? I can probably run my business on 10% bad data and still do just fine. Maybe even higher if you have other companies that are doing things differently. Your process is weak. Maybe you have a lot more dirty data. But what do you do to solve that problem? You throw people at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so someone's taking ownership. Someone's getting thrown on the problem, fixing the data, making sure it's clean. So what is that threshold between how much junk data can I tolerate before I have to start cleaning it? Different industries are going to handle different levels of this.
Man, I'm going to lean into what Tommy's saying. So like the commodity part, and I don't really, there's an aspect that I agree with you, Mike, but there's the other aspect that I don't.
Okay.
Because the commoditization of data and or systems that allow business to use them, it is a problem. Like anybody can name any of the it's been a long day. I mean, it's such a short day. I'm just getting up.
All-nighter.
Like pick a CRM.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
A perfect example of the commoditization of data and or platforms is throwing business people who have no idea how to architect systems of data into CRMs. And the result is the CRMs that we get to deal with, right? Like that is a commoditization of simplifying data work to the point where anybody can do it. And the problem, and we've seen it, Mike, you've seen it, right? It's just how bad is the implementation, so much so that you're right. You do have to throw people at it. Eventually, a lot of people and people that actually know what they're doing related to building systems of data architectures in a CRM. So I do think there's a problem that is rampant. And yes, ultimately there's an owner, but even if the CRM gets launched with somebody who has no idea how to build the infrastructure underpinning these applications, they're the owner, but they're building something that's defective for the organization. I think but unknowingly.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's my point.
Eventually,
yes.
as an organization evolves,
you figure out,
like,
oh shoot,
yes,
you should have had keys over here.
Now we're talking data stewardship.
Yep.
Now we're talking cleanup.
Yep.
Now we're talking
Correct.
like all of the things that evolve. And that's where I do agree with you.
Yeah.
Like, yes, structure, all of the fixing of the things has to be done, but that's after the fact. So like it's become so easy that anybody can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in some way, shape, or form, like, you know, even on the visual level, a lot of just because somebody can do it doesn't mean that they're doing it with intentionality
Mm-hmm.
or an understanding of how something should work.
I don't know if we even answered your question at all. I think we just discussed.
I did. He said, "Is it a commodity?" I said, "Yeah, I think it is."
Okay.
First off, I love that we're talking about data visuals, the history of data viz, and we're talking about people and this customization because I think this is dead on point. Are you kidding? This is
okay. Just making sure I didn't. I just
no,
felt like I was saying things and maybe it wasn't.
Well, we're always saying
your question.
It's always gibberish, but it's just how we interpret it. So, but no, let me focus first what Seth said because I think this is kind of the underlying tone that we're talking about here. The CRM systems, as soon as you said that, I just remember some implementations like it's all fully custom. You can do anything you want in this custom tooling. If you want to make this field or this, and that's usually what led to problems. And I think about opening up Power BI. You can customize everything. It's a white space. I can customize how big the space is. And a lot of times to me, if I were to answer the question, that commodity is we don't build, I think, solid enough roads, right? We want people to drive. I want people to be able to navigate and take their own directions. But a lot of times these are very gravel roads. And because I can customize the page, there's, I can choose, like you said, I can do 15 colors on a bar chart. No one's going to give me an error, right? There's not going to be a pop-up that says, this is a terrible design. Would you like to reconsider? It just goes out into the nether sphere and either stays there forever or, some whatever, maybe there's an evolution there, but this customization is part of that commoditization. Anything just like the data that we can get in and do anything with whenever we want with Power BI, with any technology really, but focus on the data viz. I have the ability, and more importantly, any user does, and this goes to your point, Mike, on the people side, anyone has that ability and the ownership with maybe not the permit. I don't want to say permissions, but maybe not the I don't want to certification, but that they have the ownership, but they may not have the credentials. Is maybe what I'm trying to say. They either have the ownership of the data or to build it, because everything's fully custom. To me, the biggest guardrail or the biggest barrier that we see as we try to move forward with data visualization is this lack of true roads, of exits, of the highway that's being built, because that constantly pushes people back. I will always push on the trust issue. I will always push on people's misinterpretation of data, because I've lived it. I've seen other clients live it, where we have 1,000 reports. We never set out the guardrails for how we're going to build these reports of a standard. And that's too much of a cognitive load. And people just follow their own behavior to something of the least path of resistance. So to me, every step we try to take forward with technology and commoditization, if we're not aware of of building guardrails, we're going to take a step back.
I'm going to use wow, a lot of good things to unpack there. Okay, my first unpacking thought here is, to your point around Seth, kind of maybe a weave in point of Seth, what you were talking about, and Tommy, maybe what you're talking about here, the different off ramps to different systems and things, right?
Yeah.
So I liked that analogy. And Seth, you were talking about, the CRM system. And so my mind goes to, like, okay, one that I'm familiar with and kind of know is like Salesforce, right? There's a system that's made of Salesforce. I believe the Salesforce app developers have their own priorities in mind when they're selling that software, because they're trying to build a tool that services as many companies as possible. And so Salesforce is, I'll give you all the custom everything. And literally they could care less about your data integrity and all the data things that you're trying to, like, they're trying to build a solution about what their tool can do. Give you everything that you need to use solely their tool. Cool, get it. But there's all these other systems, like we have internet traffic, we have other apps that we've built that are custom in-house. Like, how do we identify these customers across all these various apps? How does everything synchronize? So as more companies, I think, off-road off of custom software that they've built, they've found it's cheaper to go with pre-built solutions. But pre-built solutions are kind of incomplete because it's a solution by itself. It doesn't necessarily talk well with other software. And so there's a competing priority between the enterprise datas and then the app built datas, or the things you're buying off the shelf. So I feel like that's one thought here was one, I feel like there's a lot of competing priorities between who wants to give access to what data and who's prioritizing what things. And then your latter comment at the very end of your statement there's, Tommy, you said, people are going to go find the lowest path of least resistance. And I think that's right. I think people are naturally built with entropy. I don't know, it's a very scientific term. Entropy, the lowest level of energy, right? It's
We'll allow it.
We'll allow this is allowed. This comment is allowed.
Call me entropy. No.
Hey, we're at 38 minutes in. There's all the flakes have already fallen off the podcast. We're only into the hardcore listeners now at this point, so I can use big words at this point. So everyone is trying to get down to like that minimum level of energy to be able to expend to do something. So I'm always trying to do that. What's the efficient way to do things? And if it's efficient for me not to learn something new, not to use a new tool, just to do it in Excel, I'll just do that because it was efficient. I know how to do it and move on. But I think you have to kind of push people sometimes, because getting to that low level isn't necessarily always what we want to do strategically to get us better at collecting our data. And so I don't know if that comment really fits with what you were thinking about, Tommy, there, but better communication between apps might solve some of that. That would require every app you use to have better communication with every other app.
Yeah, I mean they're all the little app that saved the day, right? Like all of them are like aligned for a singular purpose, and all it requires is somebody to learn the tool, and then they'll want to learn that, like use that tool any company they go to.
Yeah,
and that's how you get 30 third-party applications in your company. not saying that that's a bad thing, right?
No, it just happens.
But to your point, like you typically engage with those third parties in a more strategic way when you have data programs that ensure that like what you're going to go apply meets the greater need of the organization, as opposed to spending a bunch of money just for your one singular thing.
Yes.
Because that could drive the decision between the 1 or 2 or 3 apps that you were going to choose to solve your
Yep.
business problems.
Correct.
I'm going to lean into like Tommy's comment around no, there are no roads, because I think it's very applicable in data as well as this visualization article that we're talking about over time, right? Cars, right? When they first came out, not everybody had them.
Yep.
Right? They're expensive. Everybody
You had to feed the engine all the time.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
right.
a lot of maintenance. But when you saw one, like that was unique. Same with visualizations. But if we keep on that analogy, right? We can drive anywhere now.
Mhm.
Everybody's got a car.
Off-road. Yeah.
But it depends on the
Mhm.
road, right? There is a significant, and this is where I think if we extrapolate this idea that anybody and everybody can create visualizations or build bad data structure, right? It's because you have access to the car. There is a significant difference, and maybe we don't ourselves delineate it enough, and maybe we should have a framework that helps folks, because the way I see this is there's a huge difference between having a car and knowing how to drive through a small town with one stop sign
Really good point. Yeah.
versus a small city with stoplights versus big city with many types of signs that you've never seen before, driving highway speed versus big city 6-lane highway speed. And the final like driving conundrum that even traps adults who've been driving for forever and a day is the dreaded roundabouts.
Oh boy.
Right? Like, how do you navigate
Throw
that?
Tableau
So
roundabouts in there anywhere.
Oh, if we start to say that, hey, like there are 3, 4, 5 different kinds of levels for data, for visualization, for what is the path that we need to recommend or guide users or even organizations down, and say, hey, like to your point, Tommy, it almost sounds like your experience was, yeah, man, they wanted roundabouts, and we were still talking small city stoplights.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there was no structure, there was no infrastructure to support the things that they want. Albeit, if you have a small city and stoplights, roundabouts are a great solution. But it's like you want the big city 6-lane highway,
Right.
with a population of 5,000 people. Like there's a bunch of ways in there. It's like like I don't even know if that was a good analogy, but it's like there's a disconnect between like what it is you think you can have or think you're ready to pursue versus like the reality of, do you have your data infrastructure? Do you know visualization? Do you know how to build a good looking report that's valuable and drives insights, as opposed to, great, you built a pretty looking thing and nobody knows how to use it.
And this part of the choice thing, by the way, my brain's going to when I went to Italy and the way they developed roads. I thought they were trying to kill people, the way the roads merged together, which is like, I didn't drive, but I just remember like holding my wife's hand going, we'll make it. And like compared to like Chicago or even New York. But it's funny you say that though, too, because you're right. I keep going back to this theme with this article, because as I read the article, the most foreign thing to me in the article is this lack of resources that everyone had to deal with, which is such non-existent today on whether I'm building on the web or building in Power BI desktop, or what data do I need, which all the choices available to us really, I think, requires, whether you're the sole builder or in a team, to have a standard process. And that goes to your training, your skilling up in data viz. Again, I don't know how much I would push on the managed self-service to like, you need to read storytelling with data, but man, like there's got to be some fundamentals that we put on. Bar charts are simple and they look simple, but that doesn't mean that what we're trying to convey, to your way earlier point, Seth, has the value, right? I can easily build a bar chart. Whether or not that actually has the intended impact is up for discussion. And that goes to me because we have this very giant flux of all customizations without, kind of a standard set of what we're going to do. I don't know if you had anything on that, because I had a really fun question to ask you guys. So I want to see if you had anything there.
Well, I want to keep going.
Yeah.
I like your point there. And what you remind me is something that we've talked on a previous one. I think we should have a full episode on it. Is Javan's paradox? Jovan's? I don't know how you say it.
Yeah.
But Jovan's paradox. I'm gonna say Jovan's, but probably said differently. But it's the idea that is as you bring the cost down on something to use it, it gets used more.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean, like the commoditization of things. Like, so if I give you, it's supply and demand. Basically, it's kind of basic supply and demand stuff, right? The cheaper I can make something to run or do or use or consume, the more people will then use it because it's just like nothing. And so now we have this concept of like light. Light was analogy to this, like, a light analogy where when it was very expensive to make a candle and you had to make the wax and get the and make it and put it together, you'd have candles in your house, but you wouldn't have a lot of them. Well, now today we have this problem of the exact opposite. We have this electricity stuff and it's so cheap to consume. And now we have light, and we have this thing called light pollution now because we literally have so much of it that we're polluting the area. You can't even see the stars because we make so much of our own light here in the US or the world or whatever. So it's like that same concept. If you want people to consume more of something, make it a commodity, make it so easy to use. And I think of this, I think all the companies are trying to do this now. So I just saw a video the other day, and this may have been out for a while, I don't know, but Tableau Public just announced a desktop installer that is now free.
I'm switching. What now?
I think well, you think about it, right? This is making it a commodity, right?
9 years later.
Well, Microsoft pushed this button 9 years ago, making their desktop application free. And again, granted, there's a lot of limitations on this thing, but like you're seeing other visualization programs in order to keep up and not lose market share. They're trying to compete at the same level. And so now they're also trying to commoditize the same thing that Microsoft is doing with Power BI. So other companies are beginning to compete in this space. So yeah, I think it's very appropriate to say, like, look, if you want to get people to use more stuff, and Microsoft's advantage here is if I get more companies to heavily rely upon this data coming out of these reports, they will continue to buy month after month this tool, this resource over and over again. And as it becomes more of a commodity, as it becomes more easier, you're going to continue needing a bigger premium SKU. You're going to get more data. You're going to need to buy more capacity units. So like the pricing model is genius here because they're going to just keep making it easier and easier and easier to use because you got to just keep buying more and more capacity units to keep up with the demand of the higher amounts of usage. Back to my point, I think very early in the conversation here was, well, now we need to really evaluate what's good stuff and what can we carve off and say that's not good because it's just becoming too much a commodity.
I love talking to you guys. Gosh, it's just the highlight of my week. So I think we've been looking back a lot. So I'm actually really excited to ask this question. It's a little thought exercise. Pretty straightforward. I'm not going to do too much ADHD with the question, even though I'm already doing that right now. Anyways, if we're to push data visualization forward, and if you could choose one of the three, what's going to be the main factor that's going to push data visualization forward for organizations and for people? Is it going to be the technology, and as it rapidly evolves, better access to build reports on the web, yada, yada? Is it going to be the amount and the access to the right data, not just data, but more structured? Or is it going to be the people and their cognitive load? More people will be viewing visuals. Thus, more people will have ability to understand visuals. Of those three, you could pick one. What's going to be the major contributing factor to getting better data visualization moving forward in the future?
Yeah, where I'm struggling right for now for me is when you say the word better visualization. I think I have to define that first in order to answer your question. So I'm going to say I'm going to measure better visualizations by pure oh man, on one hand I want to do pure consumption numbers. Like I want to say better usage of this means more views, right? That's what I'm thinking. On one hand I'm like, just use it more is better.
Yes.
But I know that's a very short-sighted answer. And I would like to have a more elaborate answer of our organization. If I think about my organization, I want my organization to rely upon reports that produce value and ultimately produce better product or services on the output. So
we already know, we've done one of our previous episodes. They actually do polls on data culture. So let's use that as our measurement.
So if I'm trying to, if better reporting is increasing the value of data culture or using more of it in our organization, I'm going to say it's not the technology at this point. I think the best move we can be doing is supporting our existing reporting with easy to find and matching up the need, the value for why this report exists to people answering their questions about the data. I think it's more of a people and education part of the challenge than it is actually technology driven at this point. That's what I'm going to go with.
We'll allow it. So
I get 2 allows and one.
Restate your question.
Say what?
Restate your question. What
To
of the three?
Forward. Yes,
What's going to push it forward?
People and their cognitive load.
The technology.
Why? I'm intrigued. You
Because-
actually really said that, so I was not expecting that.
Well, like ultimately, like building good visualization. I think ultimately you're not going to get tons more people investing in understanding the intricacies of some of the visualizations. Eventually, technology is just going to, I think, get so simple that it'll start utilizing those guidelines that we harp on all the time to create better and good and valuable visualizations, along with the appropriate context for people to digest. So it's not I don't think it has anything to do with access to data either, because it requires people to understand how to work with data, and the vast majority of people don't. Right. So if I'm going to pick one of those, it's where everybody's putting all their eggs in one basket right now with AI anyway. Eventually, there's going to be enough structure. There's going to be enough structure there where technology is removing the complexity of the jobs that we have, and it'll do the same thing in visualization.
I honestly was not expecting that answer, because I'm going to probably choose the people and solely the people.
Why?
What?
Why?
Yeah. If the technology and our data, current way we access data, stayed the same for the next 5 years, but we actually taught an organization how and understanding how to look at data and consume it. To me, the more they know what the data is doing, the more they can ask the right questions. They don't know what the technology they can do right now, right? And we're already trying to say the technology is going to move forward and the structured data. They don't know those words. I don't need to tell my CFO what a semantic model is. God forbid if I say that word to him or her. But if they have a better understanding,
I'll smack the semantic model out of you, Tommy.
I'll smack the semantic out of you. Yeah. But if they have a better idea of what's possible on the canvas to interact with it, they're going to help me. They're going to ask better questions to me. They're going to have a better dialogue with the people building the report or building the visuals. I mean, and we're going to deal with this. To me, the same thing with AI is the AI is going to get a ton better. I think the guy from ChatGPT just said, listen, we're developing ChatGPT 5. We're embarrassed by ChatGPT 4. He just said that. So, which is insane. So we can barely get a handle. I'm going off on a tangent, but we can barely get a handle on the technology now. Outlook changed drastically now, and everyone's getting used to that. Microsoft's probably working on the next new Outlook. And so people are always behind the technology. Can I get people a better language around data visualization? Not just the higher ups and not just the people building, but across, top down, wide, left, right, across the people who are utilizing their data to say, I know where to access it and I know what I'm looking at. Therefore, I can ask a better question to my BI author, to the BI team, or to my managed self-service to say, I see the data this way. I would like to see it this way. So they can ask me better questions. So that's where I put my eggs in that theoretical basket.
I like it. I think this is a good topic. I don't know. We're not going to kick out the answer here at this point, but time will tell. We'll see if Seth's large language model comes out here solves the world's problems.
I'm going to let your last comment just slide into an argument for another podcast.
I will say, tell me the topic and I'll put it on board. Okay, so.
Nope, I already wrote it down.
Oh, you did?
It's a great closer though, Tommy. I'm just going to be quiet now.
All right. Let's wrap with some final thoughts here about this article.
That was
Tommy,
my
just putting some.
final
Oh, that was your final. Okay, Seth's already done his final thought. Tommy, any
I
final
agree
thoughts?
100% with Seth.
All right, good. 2 final thoughts done. I will say, I think my final thought here is, again, I enjoy this topic. I like this area. I think this is a really good place to be in. I think we're in a very interesting space where things are going to get easier, more commoditized. It's now going to be how do organizations wrestle with that? What is self-service and what is central BI? How do we keep it to have quality? Those are going to be the challenge we're going to struggle with. So anyways, with that, I want to say thank you very much for listening to the podcast. I hope this hour of time was worth your time you're spent. Or if you're running, I hope you had a successful run and safe run wherever you're doing. We've heard a lot of people run and do exercise through this podcast. Maybe we should do a podcast where all three of us are on treadmills and we're just huffing and puffing through. Like we'll actually participate on some activities here, as opposed to just
build your calculate statement.
Maybe they wouldn't go over so well on video. So maybe we'll pass on that one. But anyways, thank you so much. We appreciate your listenership. If you don't mind, if you like this podcast, if you found some value from this conversation, please share with somebody else. We'd love to get the word out more about what's going on in the podcast. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about? Do you disagree with something that was recently said? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Excellent. With that, we'll say thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time.